What if the person you dismissed as invisible, the one you treated as nothing more than an obstacle in your path, was secretly the one who held your entire world in their hands? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the deceptive nature of power and the quiet strength of those we overlook. It's about a waitress named Clara Evans, whose worn-out shoes and tired smile concealed a secret that was about to bring the city's most arrogant billionaire, Damian Sterling, to his knees. It's a reminder that karma doesn't always send a warning, and sometimes the bill comes due in the most unexpected way imaginable. Stay with us to hear how a single glass of spilled wine in a high-end restaurant triggered the collapse of an empire. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theatre. Every night the same play was performed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The actors were the city's elite, the tech moguls, the banking scions, the old money matriarchs, and the stagehands were people like Clara Evans. Her role was simple: be swift, be silent, and above all, be invisible. At 28, Clara wore her waitress uniform like a second skin. It was a well-tailored but drab grey dress, a canvas onto which the wealthy patrons could project their own importance. She had learned the geography of this world intimately, the precise angle to pour the Chateau Margaux to avoid a single drop marring the white linen, the exact moment to clear a plate without interrupting the flow of a multi-million-dollar conversation, and the carefully neutral expression to maintain when a dismissive hand was waved in her face. Clara wasn't born into this life of servitude. In fact, her life had been a quiet academic one. She'd graduated with a degree in art history, dreaming of curating galleries and preserving beauty. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. A family illness had drained her savings, and her father's death a year ago had left her unmoored adrift in a sea of debt and grief. The Gilded Sparrow, with its lucrative tips, was a life raft. It was meant to be temporary, a stopgap, until she could find her footing again. But months had bled into 2 years, and the apron strings felt more like chains every day. Her colleagues saw her as quiet and efficient. They knew she was smart. She'd sometimes help their kids with homework, questions they couldn't answer, but they assumed her past was as unremarkable as her present. No one knew about the worn copy of Proust in her locker, or the sketches of Renaissance architecture she drew on napkins during her break. To them she was just Clara, reliable, steady, forgettable. This particular Tuesday evening was no different. The air hummed with the low thrum of expensive chatter. Clara moved between tables with a practiced grace, her mind a whirlwind of orders, allergies, and special requests. Table 7 needed more bread. Table 12's steak was to be butterfly cut medium well, a culinary sin she was paid not to judge. Her manager Marcus, a perpetually stressed man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, pulled her aside near the service station. Clara, table 3. It's Damian Sterling. You know the drill. Clara's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the drill with Mr. Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Prescott Holdings, a massive luxury goods conglomerate that owned everything from boutique hotels to high-fashion labels. He was a titan of industry, a regular fixture in Forbes, and notoriously the worst customer in the city. He treated service staff like dirt beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes. The unspoken rule was to give him what he wanted before he knew he wanted it, and never ever make a mistake. He's with the board from a Japanese firm they're trying to acquire. High stakes, Marcus whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. Just be perfect. Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course, Marcus. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. Damian Sterling sat at the head holding court. He was exactly as his public image suggested, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, a ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist, and a look of bored arrogance etched onto his handsome face. He wasn't speaking. He was pontificating, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. His guests, 3 impeccably dressed Japanese businessmen and a younger, nervous-looking associate, listened with rapt attention. "The market waits for no one," Sterling was saying, gesturing with a hand that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor. Sentimentality legacy. These are anchors. You cut them loose or you sink. Clara waited for a pause that never came. Finally, she stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Gentlemen, may I offer you an aperitif while you look over the menu?" Sterling didn't even look at her. He simply raised one finger, a gesture that said, "Wait." Clara froze, her body held in a state of suspended service, a living statue in a grey dress. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. She wasn't a person to him. She was an interruption. After finishing his point with a self-satisfied smirk, he finally turned his head, his cold blue eyes scanning her from head to toe with a look of utter disinterest. "We'll start with a bottle of the 82 Petrus," he said, his tone suggesting he was ordering a soda. He hadn't glanced at the wine list. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who knew the most expensive thing on it by heart. "An excellent choice," Sir Clara replied, her voice professionally placid. He waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his guests. "Just bring it." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could feel his presence like a physical weight on the entire room. He was a black hole of ego, pulling all light and energy towards himself. She thought of her father, Arthur. He had been a businessman too, a small-scale builder who knew every one of his employees by name. He believed a company was a family, that its foundation was respect. Men like Damien Sterling were everything her father had despised. They built empires on the backs of invisible people, never once thinking to look down. Little did she know her father's world and Damien Sterling's were about to collide with her standing at the epicenter. And in her locker next to the copy of Proust was a thick manila envelope from a law firm, an envelope she hadn't yet found the courage to open. The 82 Petrus was stored in the deep cellar, a hallowed space where bottles worth more than Clara's car rested in silent, temperature-controlled reverence. She retrieved it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. The bottle was cool and heavy in her hands, a vessel of fermented history. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it tasted like, this nectar of the gods that men like Sterling consumed so casually. Returning to the table, she presented the bottle to him as protocol dictated. Again, he didn't look at her, merely grunting his approval. Clara began the delicate ritual of opening the wine. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying sigh. She poured a small amount into a decanter, the deep, ruby liquid swirling like liquid velvet. Then she poured a tasting measure into Sterling's glass. He picked it up, swirled it with an air of practiced connoisseurship, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a moment, before swallowing. Fine, he declared, not to her, but to the table at large, as if the wine had simply materialized in his glass. Clara began to pour for his guests. She moved with practiced economical movements, her focus entirely on the task. She served the Japanese businessman first, her hands steady, her presence unobtrusive. As she moved around the table to pour for Sterling's young associate, a man named Peterson, he shifted suddenly in his seat, nervously adjusting his tie. His elbow jutted out, knocking Clara's arm just as she was tilting the decanter. Time seemed to slow down. The heavy crystal decanter slipped from her grasp, and the world became a tableau of impending disaster. She saw the dark red cascade of wine, a beautiful, terrible arc through the air. It didn't land on the table. It didn't land on the floor. It landed squarely on the front of Damien Sterling's crisp white $1,000 shirt. Silence. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked out of the room. All conversation at the surrounding tables ceased. Every eye in the Gilded Sparrow was on table 3. The wine spread across Sterling's shirt like a grotesque blooming flower. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her professional composure shattered. "It was an accident. Before she could finish, Damien Sterling rose slowly from his chair. His face, moments before a mask of casual arrogance, was now a thundercloud of pure fury. His blue eyes, once cold, were now blazing. He looked down at the crimson stain on his chest, then up at her. He didn't shout. His voice, when it came, was low, controlled, and infinitely more terrifying than any yell. An accident, he hissed each word, a venomous dart. "Do you have any idea what this shirt costs? It costs more than you make in a month. But that's not the point, is it?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. She could smell the expensive cologne, the wine on his breath. "The point," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "is incompetence. The point is that I come here to conduct business, to entertain important partners, and I am subjected to this clumsiness." He gestured vaguely at her, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. His associate Peterson was pale with terror. "Sir, it was my fault. I moved my arm. Quiet, Peterson," Sterling snapped without looking at him. His laser focus was entirely on Clara. "People like you," he said to her, his voice dropping even lower, "are supposed to be invisible. You are background. You are furniture that moves. Your one job is not to screw up, and you can't even do that. What is your name?" Clara's throat was dry. "Clara, sir." He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Clara, of course. A name as forgettable as your face." He leaned in his voice, a conspiratorial whisper that everyone at the table could hear. "Let me give you a piece of life advice, Clara. Some people are born to lead, to create, to matter. And some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place. You are utterly and completely insignificant." The words struck her harder than a physical blow. It wasn't just the anger. It was the casual cruelty, the deep-seated belief behind his words. He genuinely saw her as a lesser being. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. She could feel the stares of every person in the restaurant burning into her back. Marcus was now rushing over his face, a mask of frantic apology. "Mr. Sterling, I am terribly, terribly sorry. On behalf of the Gilded Sparrow, please, this entire meal is on us, and this employee will be dealt with immediately." Sterling shot Marcus a look that could curdle milk. "See that she is." He then turned to his Japanese guests, his demeanor shifting instantly back to one of oily charm, though his rage still simmered just beneath the surface. "Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies for this unfortunate interruption. A minor domestic disturbance. Please allow me to arrange for a private room where we can continue our discussion away from the help." He threw one last look of disgust at Clara, a look that said, "You are nothing," before striding away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen, the shattered remains of the decanter at her feet. The deep red wine pooled on the floor, looking unnervingly like blood. At that moment, something inside her shifted. The shame was still there, but beneath it, a different emotion began to smolder. It was a cold, hard ember of anger, insignificant, forgettable, furniture that moves. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had cared for a dying mother, the hands that sketched buildings and paid bills. They were capable hands. She was not nothing. As Marcus began to gently guide her away from the scene, her mind went back to the unopened envelope in her locker. It was from the firm of Finch, Covington and Dunn, the executors of her late father's estate. She had been putting off opening it, afraid of what legal complexities and final goodbyes it might contain. But now Damien Sterling's cruel words echoed in her mind, and a new resolve took root. She would not be insignificant, and she had a sudden, powerful feeling that whatever was in that envelope was about to change everything. The walk to the staff locker room felt like a mile-long march of shame. The whispers of her colleagues, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, followed her. Marcus was surprisingly gentle. He didn't fire her on the spot as she'd expected. "Take the rest of the night off, Clara," he said softly, handing her a glass of water. "Go home, we'll talk tomorrow." He knew a lawsuit for wrongful termination was the last thing the restaurant needed after a scene with a man like Sterling. But Clara didn't go home. She sank onto the hard bench in the locker room, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her hands trembling. Sterling's words played on a loop in her head. "Some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place." Her eyes fell on her locker, on the envelope. With a newfound urgency, she fumbled with the lock, her shaking fingers struggling with the combination. She pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. The embossed logo of Finch, Covington and Dunn seemed to stare up at her with an air of immense gravity. Her father, Arthur Prescott, had always used this firm. He had trusted one of the senior partners, Alistair Finch, implicitly. She tore it open. Inside was a letter several pages long, written on heavy bond paper, and a smaller sealed envelope, marked, "For Clara in my own hand." She unfolded the official letter first. The legalese was dense, but the core message was shockingly clear. It spoke of trusts of holding companies and of share structures so complex they made her head spin. Her father, a man she'd always thought of as a successful but modest builder, had been far more. The small company she knew, Prescott Construction, was merely the sentimental heart of a much larger and far wealthier entity. Years ago, seeking to expand, Arthur Prescott had entered into a partnership, forming a holding company to acquire and manage other businesses. The name of that holding company was Sterling Prescott Holdings. Clara read the sentence again and again. A cold dread mingled with a dawning, terrifying sense of disbelief washed over her. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel joke by the universe. But there was no mistake. The letter detailed how her father, Arthur Prescott, had been the majority shareholder. He had retained 51% of the voting shares, a controlling interest he had never relinquished. His partner, a young, ambitious executive named Damien Sterling, controlled the other 49%. After Arthur's health had begun to fail, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, ceding the role of CEO to Sterling under a strict contractual agreement. But he had always remained the quiet, guiding force, the true owner. And then came the final earth-shattering paragraph. As per the unalterable terms of the primary trust established by Mr. Arthur Prescott upon his death, his entire controlling interest of 51% in Sterling Prescott Holdings, along with all associated assets, passes directly and wholly to his sole heir, his daughter, Clara Annalise Evans. She was no longer Clara Evans. In the eyes of the law, she was Clara Prescott. She had used her mother's maiden name after her parents' divorce to give herself a sense of independence, a choice her father had always respected. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared at the grimy linoleum, her mind a blank slate of shock. Damien Sterling, the man who had just called her insignificant, forgettable furniture, the man who ran his company with an iron fist and a contempt for the little people. He wasn't the owner, he was an employee. And she, Clara, the clumsy waitress, was his new boss. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absurd, that she almost laughed. It was a hollow, breathless sound in the empty locker room. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it had a taste for brutal, poetic justice. Her hands, no longer shaking, reached for the second envelope. Her father's familiar, strong handwriting was a comfort and a pain. She opened it. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my time is over. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you are not alone. I have so many regrets, my girl. The biggest is that I didn't tell you the full truth of my life's work. I kept it from you to protect you, to allow you to find your own path without the weight of my legacy. I see now that this may have been a mistake. It was pride. I wanted you to be an art historian, not a businesswoman. But the company is yours now. It is your burden and your opportunity. It was built on a simple principle that quality and integrity matter more than profit, and that the people who work for you are your greatest asset, not lines on a spreadsheet. I fear my partner Damien has forgotten this. He is brilliant, but he lacks a heart. He sees the world in numbers, not in people. Do with this inheritance what you will, my love. Sell it, run it, or burn it to the ground. It is yours. But I ask one thing of you before you make your decision. Look. Truly look. Understand what it is you now own. Understand the people whose livelihoods depend on it. My lawyer, Alistair Finch, will help you. He is the only man I ever trusted more than myself. Be strong, be wise, but most of all be the good and kind woman I always knew you were. All my love, forever dad tears, streamed down Clara's face, hot and silent. They were tears of grief for her father, but also tears of a strange, terrifying clarity. His final words were a call to action. Look. Truly look. She looked at her reflection in the small locker mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly askew. She was still wearing the drab grey uniform of the Gilded Sparrow, but when she looked into her own eyes, she saw something new. The smouldering ember of anger had been fanned into a flame. It was no longer just about the personal humiliation. It was about her father's legacy. Damien Sterling, the man who preached about cutting away sentimentality and legacy, was actively destroying the very principles upon which her company was built. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and terrifying. She would not march into the Sterling Prescott headquarters tomorrow and announce herself. He wouldn't respect her. He would see the waitress and fight her with every legal and corporate weapon he had. He had to be shown, not told. He needed to be undone by the very thing he despised, the insignificant person he never saw coming. She would follow her father's advice. She would look. She would stay right where she was in the shadows. She would be Clara, the waitress. She would watch, she would listen, and she would learn. And when the time was right, the furniture would stand up, and Damien Sterling would finally know her name. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch. She said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with a steel she didn't know she possessed. This is Clara Prescott. We need to talk, and we need to be discreet. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Clara was a ghost in the corporate machine of Sterling Prescott Holdings. By night, she was a ghost in the dining room of the Gilded Sparrow. Her meeting with Alistair Finch had been a revelation. He was an older gentleman, with kind eyes that held a lawyer's shrewd intelligence. He had been expecting her call. He treated her not as a grieving daughter or a bewildered waitress, but as the rightful owner of a billion-dollar enterprise. "Your father was a brilliant man," Ms. Prescott Finch had said, sitting opposite her in his stately wood-panelled office. He saw Damien Sterling's ambition and his ruthlessness. He hoped to temper it with his own philosophy, but he also put safeguards in place. "Your 51% ownership is ironclad. The board can advise, but they cannot overrule you. You are, for all intents and purposes, the queen on the chessboard." Clara, who felt more like a pawn, outlined her plan. She didn't want to just take over. She wanted to understand the company from the inside out. She wanted to see the rot that Damien had introduced. Finch had smiled. An undercover boss. Very unorthodox. Your father would have admired your audacity. He became her guide, her cue to her James Bond. He granted her top-level anonymous access to the company's servers. From a cheap laptop in her small apartment, Clara logged in under a pseudonym A. Prescott began to dig. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Her father's company, once known for its craftsmanship and employee loyalty, was being systematically hollowed out. She started with the financials. Profits were up, astronomically so, but the methods were brutal. Damien had outsourced manufacturing for their signature leather goods line to overseas factories with questionable labor practices, replacing skilled artisans who had been with the company for decades. The quality had dipped a fact, hidden by an aggressive marketing campaign. Then she found the personnel files. She saw a pattern of corporate restructuring that targeted older, higher-paid employees, replacing them with younger, cheaper staff. The pension fund had been restructured to minimize company contributions. The most damning discovery was a file labeled AP Legacy Fund. It was a philanthropic initiative. Her father had started a fund that provided scholarships for the children of employees and emergency financial aid for families in crisis. It was his heart and soul codified. Under Damien's leadership, the fund had been quietly drained, its capital reallocated to cover executive bonuses and marketing overages. He was literally taking money from the families of his workers to pad his own pockets and sell a lie of superior quality. The anger she had felt in the restaurant now had a target. It wasn't just about his personal insult to her. It was about his systemic betrayal of thousands of people of her father's entire life's work. During the day, she devoured reports and spreadsheets. She learned the names of the board members, Evelyn Reed, the razor-sharp CFO, who was fiercely loyal to Damien, George Hammond, an old friend of her father's, who had been increasingly marginalized, and two others who seemed to vote whichever way the wind of power was blowing. At night, she would put on her grey uniform and return to the Gilded Sparrow. Marcus had been relieved when she'd shown up for her next shift, apologizing profusely and offering to keep her away from the main dining room. But Clara had insisted. "I'm fine, Marcus," she'd said. "I need the money." Working there was now a surreal experience. She would serve men and women who unknowingly sat on the board of her own company. She listened to their conversations, piecing together the corporate power dynamics from snippets of overheard gossip. She learned that George Hammond was deeply unhappy with the company's direction, and that Evelyn Reed was Damien's enforcer, feared by all. One evening, George Hammond came in for dinner alone. He looked tired and defeated. Clara was assigned his table. He was polite, but distracted. "Is everything all right?" Sir Clara asked, as she refilled his water. He looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. "It's a long story, young lady. Have you ever felt like you're watching something you helped build get torn down brick by brick?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I think I know the feeling," she said, her voice soft. This place used to stand for something. He mumbled more to himself than to her. Arthur Prescott. He was a good man. He believed in building things to last. Now, it's all just about the next quarter. The soul is gone. The conversation was a small spark of hope. She had an ally even if he didn't know it yet. Her most nerve-wracking nights were when Damien Sterling returned. He came in twice more during those 2 weeks. He never once recognized her. To him, she was just another part of the scenery. The first time, he was with a glamorous model and ignored Clara so completely it was as if she were a ghost. The second time was different. He was meeting with a journalist for a puff piece. Clara watched him spin a web of lies, speaking passionately about Sterling Prescott's commitment to artisanal quality and employee empowerment. He even mentioned the Prescott Legacy Fund as one of his key initiatives, describing it as thriving. Clara had to grip the serving tray so tightly her knuckles turned white to keep from shouting right there in the middle of the restaurant. He was using her father's memory as a marketing tool while simultaneously desecrating it. That was the moment her plan crystallized. It wasn't enough to expose him. It wasn't enough to fire him. She had to dismantle his entire false reality in front of the very people whose respect he craved. She needed a stage, and she knew just the one. She called Alistair Finch the next morning. "Mr. Finch, when is the next quarterly board meeting?" "Next Friday the 24th, he replied. "Damien is set to announce record-breaking profits. He's planning to propose a massive stock buyback that will net him a personal bonus of over $20 million. "Perfect," Clara said, a cold calm settling over her. "Please send an anonymous message to the board. Inform them that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance to observe the proceedings." "A representative?" Finch asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Yes," Clara replied, looking at her reflection. She wasn't a waitress or a ghost anymore. "Tell them the majority shareholder is sending someone to protect her interests. Let him sweat for a week. Let him wonder who is coming for his crown." The game was on. The anonymous email from Finch, Covington and Dunn landed in the inboxes of the Sterling Prescott board members like a perfectly timed grenade. It was brief, professional, and utterly destabilizing. To the board of directors of Sterling Prescott Holdings, please be advised that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance at the quarterly meeting on October the 24th. The representative will be acting with the full authority of the majority shareholder to observe the proceedings and ensure her interests are being properly represented. Sincerely, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner, Finch, Covington and Dunn. The ripple effects were immediate. Clara, monitoring internal communications through her back-channel access, watched the panic unfold. Damien Sterling, who ruled his domain with absolute certainty, was suddenly faced with an unknown variable. The Prescott estate had been silent for a year. A sleeping giant he had likely assumed would stay asleep forever. The heir, an unknown daughter he'd never bothered to track down, was a non-entity in his mind. Now this ghost was sending a proxy. His emails to Evelyn Reed, the CFO, were frantic and demanding. "Who is this? What do they want? Did Finch give you any names? Is it a bank? A trust manager?" Evelyn's replies were clipped and efficient, but Clara could read the underlying tension. "Finch is a locked box, Damien. He said only that the representatives would make themselves known at the meeting." Damien's paranoia went into overdrive. He ordered a complete audit of all departmental reports, demanding that every number be triple-checked. He scheduled extra prep meetings, grilling his vice presidents until they were pale with exhaustion. He was a man trying to find a crack in his own fortress, terrified that someone else had already found it. Clara saw her chance to subtly test the waters. Working with Finch, She had him send a single follow-up query to George Hammond, the old board member who had lamented the company's direction. The query was simple. The Prescott estate has concerns regarding the dissolution of the AP Legacy Fund. Can you provide any context? The response was telling. George Hammond wrote back a long, heartfelt email detailing his objections to the fund's closure and his failed attempts to argue for its preservation. He attached the original meeting minutes, where Damien had railroaded the decision through framing it as a necessary fiscal consolidation. In contrast, when Finch sent the same query to Evelyn Reed, her response was a single, cold sentence. All fiscal reallocations were approved by the board and are in full compliance with corporate bylaws. The battle lines were being drawn before the first shot was even fired. Meanwhile, Clara's life at the Gilded Sparrow continued. She was now a spy in plain sight. One evening, just 3 days before the board meeting, Damien Sterling came in with Evelyn Reed for a strategy dinner. They chose a secluded booth, but not secluded enough for Clara, who made sure she was the one assigned to their section. She approached the table notepad in hand, her face a perfect mask of professional deference. "Good evening. May I get you something to drink?" Damien didn't even look up from the papers spread across the table. "Scotch. Macallan, 25. "Neat." Evelyn Reed, however, did look up. Her sharp, intelligent eyes lingered on Clara for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a look Clara had seen before from powerful people, a quick, dismissive scan to categorize and file away. Waitress. Unimportant. Move on. The moment passed, and she ordered sparkling water. For the next 2 hours, Clara served them refilling drinks, delivering their food, and listening to every word. Their conversation was a chilling window into their worldview. The Prescott ghost is spooking the street. Damien grumbled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We need to present a united front. The numbers are undeniable. Profit is the only thing that matters. This representative, whoever he is, will be a bean counter from a bank. Show him the money and he'll crawl back into his hole." And Hammond Evelyn asked, her voice low. "George is a dinosaur," Damien sneered. "He's still living in the era of company picnics and gold watches. He'll make some sentimental speech about Arthur's vision. I'll let him, and then we'll vote him down." As always. Clara felt a fresh wave of cold fury. They were so certain, so arrogant in their private bubble of power. But it was Damien's next words that truly cemented her resolve. Evelyn pushed a file towards him. "This is the final proposal for the V-Series handbag line. It involves closing the last domestic workshop in Ohio. We'll be laying off the remaining 60 artisans. It will increase our profit margin by another 4%. Damien barely glanced at it. "Do it. They're overpaid anyway. Any skilled worker who thinks they're irreplaceable in a global economy is a fool. They're cogs in a machine, and cogs can be replaced." He took a long sip of his scotch. "Sentiment is a liability." Clara stood by the service station, polishing a wine glass her back to them. Cogs in a machine. The phrase echoed in her mind. Her father had known the names of the men and women in that Ohio workshop. He had called them artists. She walked back to their table to clear the dessert plates. As she reached for Damien's empty plate, he looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes met hers. For a second, there was a flicker of something, a vague, misplaced sense of familiarity. He had seen her face before, recently. But where? The restaurant, another one. 1,000 different service people passed through his life. They were all a blur. He frowned, then dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. He waved a hand at her. "Just the check." As Clara ran his credit card, she looked at the name, embossed on the platinum plastic, Damien Sterling. Below it, in smaller letters, CEO Sterling Prescott Holdings. She handed the receipt back to him. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Have a good evening." Her voice was steady, her expression neutral. But inside she was making a vow. He would not close that workshop. He would not lay off those artisans. He would not win. He thought he was playing chess with a ghost, a faceless representative from a law firm. He had no idea he was sitting 3 feet away from the Queen, and she was about to checkmate him. The morning of October 24th dawned grey, and overcast the sky, a blanket of steel over the city. Clara woke before sunrise. There was no waitress uniform laid out for her today. Instead, hanging on the back of her bedroom door was an outfit she had purchased with the last of her own money, a deliberate choice. It was a simple, elegant, dark charcoal pantsuit. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfectly tailored. It spoke of seriousness and authority, not wealth. It was a uniform of a different kind. She showered and got dressed, the unfamiliar fabric feeling strange against her skin. This was armor. As she styled her hair into a simple professional bun, she looked at herself in the mirror. The tired, harried waitress was gone. The woman looking back at her was someone else. Her eyes were clear and focused, holding a quiet intensity. The weeks of digging, listening, and planning had forged a new confidence in her. She was no longer just Arthur Prescott's daughter. She was the guardian of his legacy. A car sent by Alistair Finch was waiting for her downstairs. She spent the ride to the Sterling Prescott Tower, going over her notes one last time. It was a formidable stack of financial reports, highlighting the disparity between rising profits and declining quality, damning internal emails, a detailed analysis of the gutted legacy fund, and most importantly, a list of names. The names of the artisans in the Ohio workshop. The names of the long-term employees who had been forced into early retirement. The names of the children whose scholarships had vanished. She wouldn't just be fighting with numbers. She would be fighting with lives. Alistair Finch was waiting for her in the marble and glass lobby. He looked her up and down, a proud, fatherly smile on his face. "Arthur would be so incredibly proud of you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope I can do right by him," she replied, her own voice steady. "You have the truth on your side. In my experience, that is the most powerful weapon in any room." He handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything is in order. You are legally and officially recognized as the majority shareholder. When you speak with the full weight of the Prescott estate." They rode the silent high-speed elevator to the 40th floor where the boardroom was located. As the doors opened, they stepped into a hushed, opulent reception area. A nervous-looking executive assistant hurried towards them. "Mr. Finch, welcome. We were expecting you." The assistant's eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of confusion in her expression. She was clearly expecting an older man, a banker or a lawyer, not this poised young woman. "The meeting is about to begin," Finch said smoothly. "We won't be late." He gestured for Clara to walk ahead. The doors to the boardroom were massive, carved from dark mahogany. Clara took one final deep breath and pushed them open. The room was exactly as she'd pictured it, a long, polished table reflecting the grey sky, outside high-backed leather chairs, and the faint, expensive scent of power. The board members were all there, seated. At the head of the table, looking impatient and imperious, was Damien Sterling. He looked up as they entered his eyes, immediately locking on Alistair Finch. A look of strained cordiality settled on his face. "Alistair, good of you to come," he said, rising from his chair. "We were just about to start. You must be the representative from the estate." His gaze then slid to Clara, standing just behind Finch. He didn't recognize her, not even a glimmer. In his mind, the context was so utterly impossible that his brain simply didn't make the connection. She was a lawyer's assistant, a junior associate. Furniture, and this is your, he asked, trailing off with a dismissive wave in her direction. Alistair Finch stepped to the side, a subtle, deliberate movement that left Clara standing alone in the full view of the entire board. Mr. Sterling, members of the board, Finch began his voice, resonating with quiet authority. I am here today only in an advisory capacity. The representative of the Prescott estate, the sole heir and majority shareholder of this company, is here to speak for herself. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. Allow me to introduce you all to Ms. Clara Prescott. The name Prescott hit the room first. George Hammond's eyes widened in surprise. Evelyn Reed's perfectly composed face tightened almost imperceptibly. But Damien Sterling was still processing. He stared at Clara, a deep frown creasing his brow. The name was familiar, of course, but the face was still just a nagging, unimportant whisper in the back of his mind. He had seen her somewhere. A restaurant, a gala. It didn't matter. Clara met his gaze directly. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her expression was calm, her eyes like chips of ice. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to truly look at her, to see past the pantsuit, past the boardroom, back to a Tuesday night of spilled wine and shattered glass. And then she saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the dawning, horrified recognition. His mouth fell slightly open. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The CEO, the titan of industry, looked as if he had just seen a ghost. Clara gave him a small, cold smile. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. We've met before. You said I had a forgettable face. She pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, her father's chair, and sat down, placing her portfolio gently on the polished surface. Let's begin. The boardroom was trapped in a state of suspended animation. The ticking of the large clock on the wall sounded like a hammer, striking an anvil. George Hammond was staring at Clara with dawning comprehension and a glimmer of hope. Evelyn Reed's face was an unreadable mask of stone, but her fingers were clenched tightly around her pen. The other two board members looked back and forth between Clara and Damien, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. But all the oxygen in the room seemed to be consumed by Damien Sterling. His face had cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, disbelief, denial, and finally, a simmering, desperate rage. He looked from Clara to Alistair Finch, and back again, as if trying to will this absurd reality away. This is a joke, he finally choked out his voice, a hoarse whisper. This is some kind of ridiculous, pathetic joke. He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. She's a waitress. I saw her just a few weeks ago at the Gilded Sparrow. She spilled wine all over me. Clara met his frantic gaze without flinching. Yes, I was a waitress, Mr. Sterling. And yes, I spilled wine on you, after your associate knocked my arm. But you weren't interested in the details, were you? You were too busy telling me to know my place. She let that hang in the air for a moment, before turning her attention to the rest of the board. Good morning. I am Clara Prescott. For those of you who knew my father, Arthur Prescott, you know he believed this company was a family. For those of you who didn't allow me to tell you what he stood for, integrity, quality, and a fundamental respect for the people who dedicated their lives to building this enterprise. She opened her portfolio. For the past year, Mr. Sterling, as CEO, has operated under the assumption that the majority shareholder was an absentee, uninterested party. He was mistaken. Damien slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally snapping. This is outrageous, Alistair. What is the meaning of this? You cannot be serious. The heir to the Prescott fortune is a clumsy server. The heir to the Prescott fortune, Finch stated calmly, is the woman sitting at the end of this table. Her identity has been legally verified, and her 51% controlling interest is a matter of public record. She has every right to be here. Clara took control again, her voice cutting through the tension. I've spent the last several weeks not just working at the Gilded Sparrow, but also reviewing the state of my company. And what I've found is deeply disturbing. She looked directly at Damien. You're here today to present record profits, and you are to be congratulated. But at what cost? She slid a document down the table. Let's start with the V-Series handbag line, marketed as a pinnacle of American artisanal craftsmanship. Yet I have here supply chain invoices that show 80% of the components are sourced from a factory in Southeast Asia, with numerous labor complaints filed against it. Is that your definition of artisanal? Mr. Sterling, Damien sputtered. Global diversification is a standard business practice. My father had a word for it, Clara interrupted smoothly. Lying. She slid another document across the table. Let's talk about the Employee Pension Fund, restructured 6 months ago, to, and I quote from your own memo, maximize capital efficiency. The result is that this company has reduced its contribution by 60%, while our longest-serving employees will see their retirement benefits cut by nearly a third. And yet she paused, looking at Evelyn Reed. Executive bonuses have increased by 200% in the same period. Evelyn's stony facade finally cracked. She refused to meet Clara's eyes. And then Clara's voice grew softer, laced with a dangerous edge. There is the matter of the Arthur Prescott Legacy Fund, the scholarship and aid fund for our employees' families. You told a journalist in my hearing that the fund was thriving. But it's empty, isn't it, Mr. Sterling? Drained to cover marketing expenses, and according to this transfer authorization signed by you and Miss Reed, to pay for the lease on your new corporate jet. George Hammond let out a low groan, burying his face in his hands. Clara stood up, walking slowly along the side of the table, her presence commanding the room. You've taken my father's name, his company, his legacy, and you've twisted it into a hollow shell, a machine for making money that has lost its soul. You talk about cutting away sentiment as if it's a weakness. You call skilled artisans cogs in a machine. You call people like me, the people who serve your food, clean your offices, and build your products, invisible. She stopped directly behind Damien Sterling's chair, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. You told me I was insignificant, Mr. Sterling. But the funny thing about insignificant people is that there are a lot of us. And we see everything. She walked back to her seat at the head of the table. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was a physical force. Damien Sterling, for the first time in his life, looked small. Therefore, Clara said, her voice ringing with finality, as the majority shareholder of Sterling Prescott Holdings, I am exercising my authority. I am calling an immediate vote of no confidence in our current CEO. She looked at George Hammond. George. He looked up, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Aye. She looked at the two wavering board members, Mr. Davies, Ms. Brown. They saw the future sitting at the head of the table, and they saw the disgraced past squirming in his chair. They nodded one after the other. Aye, aye. She didn't need to look at Evelyn Reed. Finally, she looked at Damien. The motion carries. Damien, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your shares are subject to the penalty clauses in your contract regarding gross mismanagement and misrepresentation of company assets. I believe you'll find that sentiment is, indeed, a liability. Damien Sterling stared at her, his face a canvas of pure impotent fury. The man who had judged her, dismissed her, and humiliated her was now undone by her. He had been so busy looking up at the sky, he never noticed the ground beneath his feet was opening up. You can't do this," he whispered. Clara leaned forward, her voice a low, clear echo of his own words from that fateful night. "Some people are born to lead, Mr. Sterling, and some people are born to pour wine. You just spent a year proving which one you are. Now it's time for you to know your place. Get out of my company." The story of Clara Prescott and Damien Sterling isn't just about a satisfying moment of revenge. It's a powerful lesson wrapped in a real-life drama. It teaches us that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. True power lies in character, in integrity, and in the quiet dignity with which we treat others. Damien Sterling saw a waitress and dismissed her, never imagining the strength and legacy hidden beneath the surface. He learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that the person you step on today might be the one signing your termination papers tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves respect, and that karma has a way of finding even the most powerful people, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the hidden heroes and surprising twists of everyday life. Let us know in the comments, what's the best story of workplace karma you've ever witnessed? We can't wait to read your stories. Thank you for listening. The stinging slap of a lie echoed louder than the crash of the wine glass. For Rosa Reed, standing in the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon, it was the sound of her life hitting rock bottom. Fired, humiliated, and falsely accused of theft, she was cast out onto the cold city streets with nothing but a month's overdue rent and the worn silver pendant around her neck, her only link to a past she never knew. She clutched the familiar metal. A small, intricate compass rose unaware that her public disgrace had been witnessed from a shadowed corner. She had no idea that the city's most powerful and enigmatic billionaire, a man haunted by his own tragic past, was about to see that very pendant and have his entire world come to a dead stop. The air in The Gilded Spoon was thick with the scent of money and roasted duck. It was a symphony of clinking glasses, hushed but important conversations, and the subtle scrape of silver on porcelain. For the patrons, it was an evening of indulgence. For Rosa Reed, it was another 6 hours on her aching feet, balancing a fragile smile and heavy trays. Rosa was not naive. She knew her place in this ecosystem. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform there to facilitate luxury, not partake in it. At 24, her life had been a series of temporary addresses and transient connections, a consequence of growing up in the unforgiving churn of the foster care system. She had no family album, no childhood home to revisit. All she had was a fierce work ethic, a quiet resilience, and the silver pendant. It had been with her when she was found as a toddler, a silent, metallic clue to an origin story she'd spent countless nights trying to imagine. The pendant, a detailed compass rose with a tiny sapphire chip at the north point, was her anchor in a life that had always felt adrift. Tonight, her anchor felt particularly heavy. Her section included Table 7, occupied by the formidable Mrs. Delacroix, and her 2 scowling, silent companions. Beatrice Delacroix was a woman sculpted from disapproval, her face a mask of pinched entitlement, her fingers heavy with diamonds, that caught the light and seemed to mock the humble surroundings of anyone earning an hourly wage. "Waitress," she'd snapped earlier without making eye contact. "More water, no ice this time. Do you think I enjoy the sound of melting ice? It's distracting." Rosa had simply smiled her practiced, polite smile. "Of course, madam. Right away." The real trouble started with the wine. It was a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. Mrs. Delacroix had made a great show of sniffing it, swishing it, and finally giving a reluctant nod of approval. Rosa poured the first glass with the steady hand of a seasoned professional. It was as she was reaching to top up the second glass that it happened. One of Mrs. Delacroix's companions, a man with a bored expression, gestured expansively while telling a story, his arm knocking squarely into Rosa's. The bottle tilted. A cascade of crimson liquid, $1,000 tide, surged across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the bodice of Mrs. Delacroix's cream silk blouse. A collective gasp hushed the surrounding tables. Mrs. Delacroix shot to her feet, a look of theatrical horror on her face. "You clumsy oaf. Look what you've done. This blouse is ruined. It's couture." "I am so terribly sorry, madam," Rosa began, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Your guest? My guest? Are you blaming my guest for your incompetence?" Mrs. Delacroix's voice rose to a shrill crescendo, drawing every eye in the restaurant. "You were careless. This is precisely the sort of service one expects from places that hire riff-raff." The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose primary skill was appeasing the wealthy, scurried over. He was short and balding, and he was already sweating. "Mrs. Delacroix, my deepest apologies. Is everything all right?" he asked, ignoring Rosa completely. "No, everything is not all right, Jonathan." She spat, using his first name to assert her dominance. "Your waitress has ruined my evening and my attire. I expect the restaurant to compensate me for the damages. Fully." Of course," Henderson soothed. "The meal is on the house, and we will of course cover the cost of the blouse. We'll handle everything." Rosa stood frozen, humiliated. She knew it wasn't her fault, but she also knew that in this world the truth was a currency she couldn't afford. She began to quietly gather the soiled napkins, her face burning with shame. Then Mrs. Delacroix's eyes narrowed. She let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her neck, then her wrist, then her fingers. "My ring," she whispered, her voice suddenly laced with a new, more venomous accusation. "My God, my diamond ring, it's gone!" Panic erupted. The woman's companions started looking under the table. Mr. Henderson's face went from pale to ghostly white. "My sapphire engagement ring." Mrs. Delacroix clarified her gaze, locking onto Rosa. "A family heirloom. It was on my finger just a moment ago, during the commotion." She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Rosa. You bumped into me. You were close to me. You must have taken it." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was absurd. It was impossible. But the certainty in Mrs. Delacroix's voice was chilling. "Madame, I would never," Rosa said, her own voice, trembling now, not with fear, but with a rising tide of indignation. "I didn't touch you, and I certainly didn't steal anything." "Search her," Mrs. Delacroix demanded, her voice ringing with authority. "Mr. Henderson turned to Rosa, his expression a mixture of panic and grim resolution. "Rosa, empty your pockets." "Mr. Henderson, this is insane," Rosa pleaded, her eyes darting around at the sea of judging faces. "I've worked here for 2 years. You know me." "Empty your pockets. Now." His voice was cold, final. With shaking hands, Rosa pulled out the contents of her apron pockets. A notepad, a pen, a few crumpled dollars in tips, and a tube of lip balm. Nothing else. "See," she said, her voice cracking. "There's nothing." Mrs. Delacroix scoffed. "She's obviously hidden it somewhere else, perhaps in her locker, or perhaps she slipped it off during the chaos. I want the police called. I want her arrested." That was the breaking point for Henderson. The word police in his immaculately curated establishment was a nightmare. He had to end this, and there was only one way to do it that didn't involve a scene with law enforcement. He had to offer a sacrifice. He turned to Rosa, his eyes devoid of any sympathy. "Rosa Reed, you have caused a major disturbance, damaged a customer's property, and now you stand accused of theft. We have a zero-tolerance policy. You're fired. Get your things from your locker and leave the premises immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Fired! But I didn't do anything. My decision is final. Get out!" He hissed, his face inches from hers. "Don't make this any worse for yourself." Tears pricked Rosa's eyes, hot and furious. She looked from Henderson's cowardly face to Mrs. Delacroix's triumphant smirk. There was no justice here. There was only power and money, and she had neither. Swallowing the bile of injustice, she turned on her heel without another word. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. She walked the long, lonely path to the staff lockers, the stairs of the diners feeling like tiny needles on her back. She cleaned out her locker, a pathetic collection of a worn-out sweater, a dog-eared paperback, and an extra pair of comfortable shoes. As she pulled her thin coat on her fingers, instinctively went to the cool metal of her pendant. She clutched it, the familiar shape of the compass, rose a small, solid comfort in a world that had just dissolved beneath her feet. She walked out the back alley door, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind her. The cold night air hit her face, and for the first time, she allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. She was jobless, falsely accused, and utterly alone. She pulled her coat tighter, the silver compass her only warmth, and walked off into the indifferent darkness of the city, never once looking back. In a secluded high-backed booth in the far corner of the Gilded Spoon, Sebastian Thorne had been nursing a glass of scotch for 2 hours. He despised places like this, the performative wealth, the superficial conversations. But this restaurant on this specific night was a ritual. It was the 22nd anniversary of the day his world had fractured, the day his 6-year-old sister Anastasia had been lost to the waves. The restaurant occupied the same building that once housed a small family-run bistro his parents had loved. It was the last place they had all eaten together as a family before the ill-fated trip. Every year, Sebastian came here, sat alone, and allowed the ghosts of his past to sit with him. At 32, Sebastian Thorne was a name that commanded respect and instilled fear in boardrooms across the globe. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up in technology and private equity. His face was known from magazine covers, his success legendary. But the sharp, custom-tailored suits and the air of unshakable confidence were armor protecting a core of profound, unhealed grief. He had survived the boating accident that had claimed his parents and sister. He had been found clinging to a piece of wreckage. But Anastasia, sweet, bright-eyed Anastasia, was simply gone. Presumed drowned. Her body was never recovered. He had been observing the drama at Table 7 with a detached, cynical eye. The spoiled theatrical woman, the weak, pandering manager, the young, flustered waitress. It was a tiresome little play he'd seen in 100 different forms. He felt a flicker of pity for the girl, but it was fleeting. The world was an unfair place. He'd learned that lesson at the age of 10. When the manager fired the waitress, Sebastian merely took a slow sip of his scotch. It was brutal, but it wasn't his business. He was about to signal for the check, ready to retreat back to the sterile silence of his penthouse, when the girl walked past his booth. She was clearly trying to hold herself together, her chin held high, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. As she passed, a busboy carrying a precarious stack of dishes swerved to avoid another waiter bumping directly into her. A small, pathetic cascade of items fell from her open bag: a paperback book, a tube of lip balm, a set of keys. She let out a soft, defeated sigh and knelt to gather them. As she bent over, the simple chain around her neck swung forward, and the pendant that had been tucked beneath her uniform came into view, catching the dim, ambient light. For Sebastian Thorne, the world didn't just stop. It violently rewound, tearing through 22 years of scar tissue in a single brutal second. It couldn't be. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculated risk, became a maelstrom of raw, forgotten emotion. He wasn't looking at a piece of jewelry. He was looking at his past. He was looking at a ghost. The pendant. A silver compass rose. He knew every single detail of it without having to see it up close. He knew the 4 main points were slightly more rounded than a traditional design. He knew the E for East was stylized to look like a wave. And he knew with a certainty that stole the breath from his lungs that if he were to flip it over, he would find 2 sets of initials engraved on the back, LT and AT. Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. His father had them custom-made by a jeweler in Geneva. His was a heavy signet ring he never wore. Hers was this delicate silver pendant she never took off. His heart, a muscle he'd long considered dormant, began to hammer against his ribs with a force that made him dizzy. Anastasia. The girl Rosa, the manager, had called her quickly, scooped up her belongings, tucked the pendant back into her shirt, and straightened up. She didn't look his way. She just kept walking, her shoulders slumped, heading for the exit. "Wait," Sebastian croaked, but the word was a stranger in his own throat, barely a whisper. He pushed himself out of the booth, his legs unsteady. He threw a few $100 bills onto the table, his mind racing faster than it ever had during a hostile takeover. He had to get to her. He had to see that pendant up close. He had to know. He strode through the restaurant, ignoring the curious stares. He reached the front door and pushed it open, the cool night air, a shock to his system. He scanned the street. He saw her, a small, lonely figure, already halfway down the block, about to turn a corner. "Hey, wait!" He called out, his voice stronger this time, echoing in the quiet street. She either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him. In a few seconds, she rounded the corner and was gone. Sebastian stood on the pavement, the phantom chill of the Atlantic in 1999 prickling his skin. The city lights blurred around him. The noise, the people, the entire world faded into an insignificant hum. All that existed was the impossible image burned into his mind, his lost sister's pendant around the neck of a fired waitress. He was not a man who believed in miracles. He believed in facts, data, and tangible proof. But what he had just seen defied all logic. It was a 1 in a billion chance. It was impossible, and yet he had seen it. A new, unfamiliar feeling began to smolder in the pit of his stomach, displacing the cold grief that had lived there for 2 decades. It was a ferocious, desperate, and utterly consuming fire. It was hope. He turned and marched back into the restaurant, his expression now one of grim, unshakable determination. The patrons parted before him like the sea. He walked straight to Mr. Henderson, who was still fawning over a slightly calmed Mrs. Delacroix. Sebastian's presence was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Henderson looked up, his eyes widening, as he recognized the city's most formidable billionaire. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered. "An honor to have you this evening. I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Sebastian ignored the pleasantries. His voice was low, cold, and carried an unmistakable threat. "The waitress you just fired. Rosa Reed. I want her file. I want her address, her phone number, every piece of information you have on her. You have 60 seconds." Mr. Henderson's sycophantic smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. Sebastian Thorne was not a man one displeased. The legends about his ruthlessness in business were whispered in every corner of the financial world. To have that cold, predatory focus directed at him over a dismissed waitress was a nightmare he couldn't have fathomed. "Her file, Mr. Thorne, Staff records are confidential," Henderson began weakly, his instincts for self-preservation warring with company policy. Sebastian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply leaned in slightly, his grey eyes like chips of granite. "Confidentiality is a privilege you can no longer afford. You have a restaurant to run. A health and safety inspection is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. A full financial audit of your parent company's tax records can be initiated with a single phone call. I can have this establishment shut down before you've had your morning coffee. Now I will ask you one last time. Where is her file?" Beads of sweat popped on Henderson's forehead. He swallowed hard. "Right away, Mr. Thorne. Right this way." He practically sprinted to his cramped back office, fumbling with a key to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thin manila folder, labeled "Reed Rosa," and handed it to Sebastian with a trembling hand. Sebastian snatched it and flipped it open. The information was sparse. An address in a run-down neighborhood across town, a cell phone number, and a social security number. No next of kin. No emergency contact. It was the file of a person utterly alone in the world. Just like Anastasia would be. He took out his phone and snapped a picture of the single page. He then looked at the two people still at table 7. Mrs. Delacroix was watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "As for you," Sebastian said, his voice dripping with ice, "your meal is no longer on the house. You will pay for the wine you intentionally had spilled. And if I ever hear of you frequenting any establishment, I have a stake in which is more than you can possibly imagine you will be removed. Am I clear?" Mrs. Delacroix, who had terrorized a manager moments before, could only nod her face, pale and her mouth agape. Sebastian turned and left without another word. As soon as he was inside his chauffeured sedan, the armor of the cold-hearted billionaire fell away, replaced by the raw urgency of a brother who might have just found a ghost. "Marcus," he said into his phone, his voice tight. "Change of plans. I'm sending you a photo, a name, Rosa Reed, and an address. I want you to find her. Now, be discreet. I don't want her scared off. Just get eyes on her. Confirm she's there. That's all. Marcus Thorne." No relation, but a man bound by a decade of loyalty and a shared past in the military, was Sebastian's head of security and his only true confidant. His voice came back calm and steady. "Understood. On my way." While Marcus, mobilized, Rosa was living through the longest night of her life. She'd taken the bus back to her small, dingy apartment, the injustice of the evening churning in her stomach. The accusation of theft was what hurt the most. Her entire life she had prided herself on her integrity. It was the one thing she owned, the one thing she had built for herself. And in a moment, it had been stripped away by a rich woman's whim. She sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, the single window looking out onto a brick wall. The eviction notice taped to her door seemed to mock her. She had been counting on her next paycheck to beg for another week from her landlord. Now that was gone. Panic began to set in cold and sharp. What was she going to do? Where would she go? Her fingers, as they always did in times of stress, found the pendant. She pulled it out and looked at it. The silver compass rose a guide, with no true north to offer. On the back, she traced the familiar, elegant engravings she had memorized as a child, ad astra per aspera. She'd looked it up once, through hardship to the stars. Below it were the initials LT and AT, who were LT and AT, her parents, a brother or sister. The questions were a constant, dull ache in her heart. Tonight the ache was sharper than ever. The pendant felt less like a comfort, and more like a cruel joke, a remnant of a life and a family she was denied. For a fleeting, desperate moment, she wondered what it might be worth. Could she pawn it? The thought felt like a betrayal, a severing of her only tie to her own history. She pushed the thought away, disgusted with herself. An hour later, Marcus arrived at the run-down apartment building. He was a tall, imposing man who moved with a quiet efficiency that made him seem to fade into the background. He didn't approach the door. Instead, he spoke to the building's disgruntled superintendent, a $50 bill making the man remarkably helpful. "Yeah, the girl in 3B, Rosa," the super said, pocketing the cash. "Got an eviction notice yesterday. Saw her packing this afternoon. Said she was staying with a friend for a bit, try and figure things out. No idea who or where." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" "Nah. Girls like that, they don't have forwarding addresses. They just disappear." Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian. "The trail's gone cold at the apartment, Seb. She's already moved on. Landlord has no idea where." Sebastian was pacing the length of his vast, minimalist penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. Frustration, a rare emotion for him, was mounting. Disappear people don't just disappear. Find her, Marcus. Use whatever resources you need. Credit card activity, phone pings, social media, DMV records. I want to know where she bought her last coffee. I want to know where she is." "I'm on it," Marcus replied. "But a girl with no credit, a prepaid burner phone, and no car, it's like finding a needle in a haystack." "Then buy the haystack," Sebastian ordered, his voice strained, "and burn it until you find the needle." He hung up and stared out the window. For 22 years he had accepted that Anastasia was gone. He had built a life, an empire, on the foundations of that loss. Now a single glimpse of a silver pendant had torn that foundation apart. If it was her, if she had been alive all this time, living a life of poverty and struggle while he lived in unimaginable luxury, the thought was a knife to his soul. The search was on. Sebastian Thorne, a man who could locate any asset track, any stock, and uncover any corporate secret, was now hunting for one lone woman in a city of millions. And as the hours turned into days, the needle remained stubbornly, agonizingly lost in the haystack. Rosa Reed, it seemed, had vanished without a trace. 3 days passed. 3 days of maddening silence and dead ends. Marcus's team, the best money could buy, came up with nothing. Rosa Reed paid for everything in cash. Her phone was a cheap prepaid model that she'd stopped using the night she was fired. She had no social media presence, no driver's license, no credit history to speak of. She was a ghost, expertly navigating the cracks of a society built on digital footprints. Sebastian grew more volatile with each passing hour. His business empire, usually his sole focus, was neglected. Multi-million-dollar deals were left hanging. His staff tiptoed around him, terrified of the silent fury that radiated from his office. He was a predator, denied its prey, and his frustration was beginning to curdle into despair. Was he wrong? Did he imagine it? Was it just a similar-looking pendant, a cruel coincidence that had sent him on this wild goose chase? He couldn't accept that. His memory was eidetic. He knew what he saw. On the fourth day, pacing his office like a caged panther, he stopped. He was thinking like a billionaire using technology and money. He needed to think about the source, the restaurant, the incident itself. "Marcus," he said, calling his security chief, "stop looking for Rosa for a moment. I want you to change focus. I want to know everything about the woman from table 7, Beatrice Delacroix." "The customer?" Marcus asked, surprised. "The one who accused Rosa of theft. Dig into her, her finances, her husband, her social life. I want to know what she had for breakfast. I want leverage." Sebastian's voice was grim. He sensed there was something wrong with that picture, something too performative about her outrage. It took Marcus less than 24 hours to unravel the Delacroix's carefully constructed facade. What he found was dynamite. Beatrice's husband, Richard Delacroix, was on the brink of catastrophic bankruptcy. His import-export business was hemorrhaging money, and they were leveraged to the hilt. The couture clothes, the expensive wine, the flashy diamonds, it was all a charade. They were broke, and they were desperate. The ring she claimed was stolen, Marcus reported to Sebastian over the phone. The heirloom sapphire. She pawned the real one 6 months ago in a private sale to cover a gambling debt. The one she was wearing that night was a very good cubic zirconia replica, worth maybe $500. Sebastian stood perfectly still, the pieces clicking into place with cold, brutal clarity. It was a scam. "Looks that way," Marcus confirmed. "My analyst thinks she was planning to cause a scene and pressure the restaurant's insurance for a massive settlement for the stolen heirloom. The spilled wine gave her the perfect opportunity. The waitress was just a convenient scapegoat." A black, icy rage, purer than any he had ever felt, settled over Sebastian. Rosa hadn't just been fired. She had been framed, her life ruined, to facilitate a cheap insurance scam. "Arrange a meeting with Mrs. Delacroix," Sebastian commanded. "Here, my office. Now." Meanwhile, Rosa's situation had gone from dire to desperate. The friend she was staying with, another waitress named Sophie, had her own struggles and couldn't house her for long. Rosa had spent days pounding the pavement looking for any work, diner, coffee shop, bar, but the story from the Gilded Spoon seemed to follow her. A quiet phone call from a concerned Mr. Henderson to a few colleagues in the industry was all it took to unofficially blacklist her. No one wanted to hire an accused thief. Her money was gone. She was down to her last few dollars, and the gnawing ache in her stomach was a constant reminder of her failure. That evening, sitting in Sophie's tiny kitchen, she made a decision that felt like a piece of her soul was being carved out. She had to sell the pendant. With a heavy heart, she found a grimy, dusty pawn shop in a part of town she usually avoided. The pawnbroker, a man with greasy hair and suspicious eyes, examined the compass rose under a jeweler's loupe. "It's silver. Not worth much," he grunted. "I'll give you $50 for it." 50. Rosa's heart sank. But the craftsmanship is so detailed, and the little stone. The stone's a chip of sapphire, maybe. Too small to matter. The value here isn't the material, it's the make. This is a custom job. High-end, probably from Europe. Geneva may be judging by the style of the clasp. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd a girl like you get something like this? It's mine," Rosa said defensively, her hand hovering over it. "It's all I have from my family." "Right. Look, $50. Take it or leave it," he said, already losing interest. Rosa hesitated. Geneva. The word echoed in her mind, a place she'd only ever seen in movies. It was the first real clue about her past she'd ever had. Suddenly selling it felt even more impossible. "No," she said, pulling the pendant back. "I'm sorry, I can't." She left the shop, her heart heavy, but resolute. She would starve before she sold it. That single word, Geneva, had reignited a tiny ember of hope. At that exact moment, 2 miles away, Beatrice Delacroix was being ushered into Sebastian Thorne's penthouse office. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city. Sebastian sat behind a massive obsidian desk, not speaking, just watching her. Marcus stood by the door, an immovable sentinel. "Mr. Thorne." Beatrice began trying to project an air of confused sophistication. "I was told you wished to see me. I'm not sure why I—" "Sit," he commanded. She sat. He let the silence stretch a tactic he used to dismantle even the most hardened executives. Finally, he slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a copy of the pawn ticket for her real sapphire ring. Beatrice's face went white. All the blood drained from it, leaving behind a sallow, terrified shell. "Your scam was pathetic," Sebastian said, his voice quiet but deadly. "You and your husband are bankrupt. You staged the entire incident at the restaurant to defraud their insurance company. And in doing so, you destroyed the life of an innocent young woman for what would have amounted to a pittance." I don't know what you're talking about." She stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't lie to me." He snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I have the power to not only expose you, but to personally finance the prosecution against you. You will be charged with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Your husband's remaining business assets will be frozen. You will lose everything. You will go to jail. Or," he paused, letting the alternative hang in the air, "you can help me." Tears began to stream down Beatrice's face, washing away the last of her composure. "Help you? What do you want?" "I want to find Rosa Reed," he said. "You owe her. You owe her more than you can ever repay, but you will start by helping me find her. You will rack your brain for every single detail of that night." Did she say anything? Mention anyone? A place she was going? Anything? Beatrice, now sobbing uncontrollably, tried to think. No, nothing. She just left. She was so quiet. Then a flicker of memory. Wait, the busboy. The one who bumped into her. He helped her pick up her things. He might have seen something, heard something. It was a small lead, but it was more than they'd had in days. "Marcus," Sebastian ordered, "get back to the restaurant. Find the busboy. Get his statement, now." As Marcus left, Sebastian stared down at the broken woman before him. He felt no pity, only a burning need to right the catastrophic wrong she had set in motion. He was closer than ever, and he wouldn't let the trail go cold again. The busboy, a young student named Leo, was a font of information. Terrified but eager to help, after Marcus explained the situation and offered a generous reward for his time, he recounted the brief interaction with Rosa. "She was really upset," Leo said, wringing his hands. "When her stuff fell, I helped her pick it up. I saw her necklace. It was cool, like an old compass. She was talking to herself, kind of whispering. Something about Sophie's couch, not lasting forever, and needing to find a job before she ended up at the shelter." "A shelter?" Marcus pressed. "Did she say which one?" "Yeah, I think so. The one over on Westmoreland. The Haven House Shelter for Women. My aunt volunteers there sometimes. I think Rosa said she used to stay there years ago when she first aged out of the system." It was the breakthrough they needed. Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian instantly. "Haven House Shelter. It's a strong possibility, Seb. It fits." "I'm going myself," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. He grabbed his car keys, forgoing his driver. This was not a task he could delegate. This was a journey he had to make alone. He drove through the city, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind was a whirlwind of hope and terror. What if it was her? What would he say? How do you reintroduce yourself to a sister who thinks she's an orphan? What if she hated him for the life he'd had, the life she'd been denied? And what if, after all this, it wasn't her? What if it was just a final cruel twist of fate? He pulled up a block away from Haven House, a modest but clean brick building. He sat in his car for a full 5 minutes, composing himself, his heart threatening to beat its way out of his chest. He finally got out and walked to the entrance, a man who commanded global markets, feeling as vulnerable as a lost child. Inside the shelter was quiet and smelled of antiseptic and warm soup. A kind-faced woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for someone." Sebastian said, his voice huskier than usual. "Her name is Rosa Reed. I was told she might be here." The woman's expression was guarded. "We don't give out information about our residents." "Please," Sebastian insisted, leaning forward, his desperation overriding his usual command. "It's a family matter. It's urgent. Life and death." The woman studied his face, seeing past the expensive suit to the raw anguish in his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She checked in an hour ago. Room 204, but she isn't planning on staying. She's just gathering the last of her things from storage here. She's leaving the city tonight." Leaving the city. He had almost missed her. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway was narrow, painted a pale, sterile yellow. He found room 204. The door was slightly ajar. He could hear the soft sounds of movement inside. He pushed it open gently. The room was tiny, containing only a metal frame bed and a small dresser. Rosa stood with her back to him, folding a faded sweater into a worn-out backpack on the bed. She looked smaller and more fragile than he remembered. His voice was a ghost of a sound. "Rosa." She froze. Slowly she turned around. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a flicker of confusion and fear in them. She didn't recognize him as the man from the restaurant. She just saw a tall, imposing stranger in an expensive suit standing in the doorway of her temporary room. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a half-step back. "How do you know my name?" "My name is Sebastian Thorne," he said gently, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. I was at the restaurant the other night. I saw what happened. It was wrong." Her expression hardened. "If you're from the restaurant, I have nothing to say. I'm leaving. Please just 1 minute." He begged, his voice cracking. The sound of his own vulnerability surprised them both. "It's not about the restaurant. It's about your pendant, the one you're wearing." Her hand flew to her chest, covering the pendant protectively. "What about it? May I see it?" "Please, it's more important than you can possibly imagine." She hesitated, her fear warring with a new sense of curiosity. There was a desperate sincerity in his eyes that was unnerving but compelling. Slowly, cautiously, she pulled the chain over her head and held it out, keeping her distance. He didn't take it from her. He just looked at it, his gaze intense. "The sapphire chip," he whispered more to himself than to her. "At the North Point." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. May I see the back?" Her heart started to pound. This man knew her pendant. With trembling fingers she turned it over. Sebastian's breath hitched. He saw the familiar, elegant script he had traced 1,000 times in his memory. Ad astra per aspera. And below it the initials that had haunted his dreams for 22 years. LT and AT, Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. He said, his voice thick with a quarter-century of grief and a moment of impossible joy. Rosa stared at him confused. "What did you say?" "My name," he clarified, his gaze locked on hers. "My birth name is Lucius Thorne. Everyone calls me Sebastian now. My father's name was Liam. My mother was Amelia. But my sister's name was Anastasia." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Rosa. Lucius and Anastasia. LT and AT. The initials on her pendant. It couldn't be. It was the stuff of daydreams, of fantasies she'd had as a lonely child. "I don't understand," she whispered, her head spinning. "We were on our parents' boat," he said, the story pouring out of him now. "There was a storm. It came out of nowhere. The boat capsized. I was 10 years old. You were 6. I remember holding on to your hand in the water, but a huge wave, tore us apart. They found me hours later, clinging to debris. They never found you or our parents. You were declared lost, presumed dead." He reached into his own coat and pulled out a heavy platinum card case. From a hidden compartment, he slid out an old, faded photograph. It was creased and worn from decades of handling. It showed a smiling boy of about 10, his arm around a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. Around the little girl's neck, clearly visible, was the silver compass rose pendant. Rosa looked from the photograph to Sebastian's face, and for the first time she saw it. The resemblance wasn't in the jawline or the nose, which had been changed by age and hardship, but in the eyes. The same intense grey eyes as the boy in the picture. Her eyes. The backpack slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor. The strength went out of her legs, and she stumbled back, landing on the edge of the bed. My brother." The word felt alien on her tongue. "Anastasia," he said, taking a step closer, his face a portrait of disbelief and wonder. "You survived. You've been alive all this time. The dam of a lifetime of loneliness, of questions of feeling utterly adrift, finally broke." Sobs racked Rosa's body, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering release. She wasn't an orphan. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't Rosa Reed, the foster kid. She was Anastasia Thorne. She had a name. She had a history. She had a brother. Sebastian knelt in front of her, his own tears finally falling freely. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just let her see him, let the truth settle between them in the small, sterile room. "I looked for you," he choked out. "For years, I hoped. But they told me to stop. They told me you were gone." She looked at him through her tears, at this powerful, wealthy stranger who was impossibly her family. "I always felt like a part of me was missing," she whispered. "Now I know why." In the quiet of the Haven House shelter, far from the world of glittering restaurants and corporate boardrooms, a brother and sister separated by tragedy and time finally found their way back to each other. The compass, after a lifetime of spinning, had finally pointed north. It had pointed home. The tiny room at the Haven House shelter, which moments before had felt like the final closing chapter of Rosa Reed's life, was now the birthplace of Anastasia Thorne's. The air was thick with the impossible reality of it all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Sebastian remained kneeling before her, his gaze fixed on her face as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. Anastasia, the name still felt foreign, a garment made for someone else, clutched the photograph in one hand and the pendant in the other, her 2 pieces of tangible history. Finally, Sebastian rose, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't the cold, commanding billionaire anymore. He was simply a man who had been given back a piece of his soul. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice soft, as if speaking to a startled fawn. "Let me take you home." The word home struck a discordant note in Anastasia's mind. Home had been a series of temporary rooms, foster houses, and cramped apartments. The concept of a true home, a place of belonging, was an abstract fantasy. She looked down at her worn backpack containing the entirety of her worldly possessions. Then she looked at the man before her in his perfectly tailored suit that likely cost more than she'd earned in a year. The gulf between their two worlds was a chasm. I don't know, she stammered, feeling a sudden overwhelming urge to run. It was all too much, too fast. I can't just... Sebastian understood. He saw the panic in her eyes. He had to ground this, make it real, but not terrifying. Okay. One step at a time. He said, his voice calm and reassuring. First, let's get you out of here. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to do anything. Just let me make sure you're safe. Please, Anastasia. Hearing him say her name again sent a shiver through her. It was real. She looked into his eyes, and saw not a stranger, but the boy from the photograph. She gave a small, shaky nod. Sebastian made a single brief phone call. Marcus, bring the car to the front of the Haven House shelter on Westmoreland. Have a security detail sweep the area and maintain a discreet distance. No press. No one gets close. And cancel my entire schedule for the next week. As they walked out of the shelter, Anastasia felt the eyes of the receptionist on her. The woman's expression was one of pure astonishment as she watched the young woman who had checked in an hour ago, destitute and defeated, now leaving with the infamous Sebastian Thorne. The moment they stepped outside the chasm between their worlds became blindingly apparent. A sleek black Audi A8, silent and imposing, was waiting at the curb. A man with a professional demeanor. Marcus held the rear door open. Anastasia hesitated, clutching her backpack strap. This was a car she'd only ever seen in movies. It felt like stepping onto a different planet. Sebastian gently placed a hand on her elbow. It's okay, he whispered. I'm right here. She slid into the plush leather interior, the door closing with a soft, solid thud that sealed off the sounds of the city. The car smelled of leather and quiet wealth. Sebastian got in beside her, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb with a smooth, silent grace. Anastasia watched the drab facade of the Haven House recede, the last remnant of her old life disappearing in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Anastasia stared out, watching the world she knew, the bus stops, the cheap diners, the laundromats go by from inside a bubble of impossible luxury. Where are we going? She finally asked, her voice small. To my home, Sebastian replied. Our home for now. It's quiet. It's private. No one will bother you there. He paused, then added, There are things I kept, things that belonged to our parents, photographs, your room. I never changed it. The thought of a room untouched for 22 years, waiting for a ghost, sent a fresh wave of emotion through her. When they arrived at the private underground garage of his penthouse building, he led her to a private elevator. It opened directly into his apartment, a sprawling, breathtaking space of glass, steel, and minimalist art. The entire city glittered below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, vast, and achingly lonely. Anastasia felt like a sparrow in a cathedral. I know this is a lot, Sebastian said, sensing her unease. There's a guest wing. It's more comfortable, less stark. I had the staff prepare it for you. Fresh clothes, whatever you need. I have my backpack, she said, holding it up slightly, a pathetic shield against this new reality. A pained expression crossed Sebastian's face. "Of course," he said quickly. He wouldn't push. He led her to a suite of rooms that were larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a soft bed, a private bathroom, stocked with luxurious items, and a window with the same stunning view. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "We can talk whenever you're ready. Or we don't have to. Just rest." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Anastasia stood in the center of the room, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cool glass. She was here in this palace in the sky, but she had never felt more lost. She was no longer Rosa Reed, but she wasn't sure how to be Anastasia Thorne. Later that evening, after a long shower where she let the hot water wash away the grime of the last week, she found Sebastian in a large study. He was staring at a framed document on the wall. A map. "It's a nautical chart of the area where the boat went down," he said, without turning. "I've spent years going over it with experts, looking for a different current, a different possibility, anything to explain how they could have missed you." He turned to her. He had changed out of his suit into a simple grey cashmere sweater, looking younger and less formidable. "They told me you were gone," he said, his voice raw. "A child psychologist told me I had invented a memory of you surviving to cope with the trauma. For years I let myself believe them. It was easier than the hope, which was excruciating." "I don't remember," Anastasia confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I have dreams sometimes. Water, the color blue, a feeling of being cold, and a song, a lullaby, that's all." Sebastian's eyes welled up. "Mother used to sing you a lullaby every night, about a silver star." The pieces were scattered, but they were starting to fit. They spent the next hour talking, filling in the vast, empty spaces of their shared history. He talked about their parents, their childhood home, his lonely life after the accident. She talked about the blur of foster homes, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the fierce independence she'd had to cultivate to survive. As she spoke about her firing, Sebastian's expression hardened, the comforting brother momentarily replaced by the ruthless CEO. He picked up his phone. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Tying up a loose end," he said, his voice flat and cold. He dialed a number. "Get me Jonathan Henderson," he commanded without preamble. A moment later, "Henderson, this is Thorne. Your career in the hospitality industry is over. You will be terminated by morning. If you ever work in this city again, in any capacity, I will personally acquire the company that hires you and liquidate your position. Goodbye." He hung up. Anastasia was stunned by the casual, absolute power in his voice. "And Mrs. Delacroix?" she asked. "She is a more complex problem," Sebastian said, his jaw tight. "She committed fraud. She framed you. She deserves to be in prison." He looked at Anastasia, his expression softening. "But her fate is not my decision to make. It's yours. Tell me what you want to happen to her, and it will be done." Anastasia thought for a long time. Her first instinct was anger, a desire for revenge against the woman who had humiliated her and pushed her to the brink. But then she thought of the abject terror on Beatrice's face, as she would be exposed and ruined. She had lived a life of powerlessness. She didn't want her first act of power to be one of pure destruction. "I don't want her to go to jail," she said finally, surprising even herself. "I want her to pay. I want every dollar she tried to scam from the restaurant to be donated to Haven House. I want her to sell her fake jewelry and her real clothes and give that money away too. And I want her to work. I want her to volunteer at the shelter's soup kitchen for a year. I want her to see what real desperation looks like." Sebastian stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. In her decision, he saw not weakness, but a strength and compassion that had survived everything. He saw the heart of the sister he remembered. "Consider it done," he said. He then walked to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a small velvet-covered box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue silk, was a heavy silver signet ring. It was carved with the same compass, rose as her pendant. "Father's," he said. "He had them made as a set. One for him, one for you." He picked it up and pointed to the inside of the band. Engraved there was the same motto, ad astra per aspera. He held it out next to her pendant, which she had placed on the desk. The two pieces of silver separated for 22 years were finally reunited. Brother and sister. Lucius and Anastasia. The compass and the ring. For the first time, looking at the two objects together in the quiet luxury of the study, it felt completely, undeniably real. "Welcome home, Anastasia," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. And for the first time, she didn't flinch at the word. She was home. From a humiliating firing to an unbelievable reunion, Rosa's, or rather Anastasia's, story is a stunning testament to the power of hope and the unbreakable threads of destiny that can connect us even across decades of separation. Her journey from the depths of despair, clutching a simple silver pendant, to the stunning discovery of her true identity, and the embrace of the brother who never truly stopped searching, reminds us that our past is never truly lost, and that justice sometimes finds a way. It's a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, a miracle might be waiting just around the corner, sparked by the smallest of clues. If this incredible story of loss, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly gone. And for more unforgettable, real-life dramas that will capture your heart, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. What was the most shocking part of the story for you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.